Sarah Stanlick from the Global School.
Thank you so much, Rob. I really appreciate it. And we can start on the next slide. So I am here to speak about the experience of the Global School and the challenge of doing high quality project-based learning and advising during the pandemic. So in the summer, our discussion started to shift away from how do we respond to this immediate emergency and challenge, and how do we really take the opportunity to plan for resilience in the long term. So we had a lot of lessons from D-term and from that emergency pivot to kind of work in and consider for our A-term planning. So I'm happy to say that I think we rose to the challenge, and that's not to sugarcoat the challenges or pretend like we're not missing the side-by-side interaction of a campus or the project site, but we did really have an important opportunity to reimagine some of our work. Next slide, please. So, and I want to say that staff, faculty, and students are all making this transition possible. In the following few slides, I want to highlight these three variables that have influenced our success, both in the emergency turn that happened in D-term, but then also the effective planning and execution of A-term. And those things really are around community support and community assets, kind of a culture of experimentation that WPI already has in its very nature, and then a bit about improving student agency and empowerment. So next slide, please. So for us in the Global School, community building and sustaining came in two ways. First, internal community building and creating new support systems and opportunities to gather virtually and to share knowledge. And then the second piece of this was external maintenance and leveraging of kind of our existing community networks and partnerships that have been built over, in some cases, decades. So internally, we were intentional about making space for sharing knowledge, ideas, and innovations on our teaching and advising. Ruth McKeough and Laura Roberts have hosted weekly programs to connect everybody who is teaching ID 2050 and who are advising to be able to share stories, ideas, and opportunities. The Morgan Center created a faculty online learning community, which many of you have interacted with in really important ways, where we can share ideas and challenges. I have a call out for SketchUp tutorials because I have a project team that needs that support system that didn't have that skill set. So by being able to reach out to folks within our WPI community, within our Global School community, we've really been able to innovate in ways that I think have been powerful and have helped really shape new innovations for the ways in which we're doing advising. Externally, sponsors rose to the occasion too. And they've been really more accessible and flexible and understanding in this pandemic times. So Professor Dominic Golding has spoke to me about the importance of, quote, real live sponsors, the ones who are committed. So in some cases, we needed to pivot to different projects, to maybe not the sponsors that we've had in the past. But for the ones who have stayed on, and that has been a majority, the folks that we're working with have been particularly strong in connecting and continuing on the partnerships. So he mentioned that it's been a smoother transition for one team, which is the Nantucket team, because the sponsors have been so invested and the students have been able to develop a similar sense of loyalty to their sponsors that they would in their in-person connections. Next slide, please. I also want to talk a bit about a culture of experimentation and dedication to high quality pedagogy. So another reason we've been able to pivot is just because this is baked into who we are as WPI. And that tech flex term has really challenged us in interesting ways. And one highlight that I wanted to bring forward was Professor Courtney Kurlanska's GPS course, which adopted a flipped classroom approach. So much of the content delivery ended up being online with small assignments, quizzes, preparatory information to make most of that in-class time. Meetings that were actually in person and together were made more meaningful because they were supposed to be focused on engaged project-based and group-based activities. So while half the class was meeting, due to social distancing, the others were working with PLAs during office hours to get really intentional and individualized feedback and insight on their work. And then students are doing presentations throughout the entire term with briefings that are constructively critiqued by their classmates. So Courtney redesigned her course to keep the goals of GPS in the front view. Team skills, critical thinking, ability to understand and evaluate global wicked problems, and building individual agency. And so her example, as well as the lessons shared by colleagues across the Global School, helped me reconceptualize what ID 2050 has been in the B term. So making most of that time that we're live and synchronous and putting a lot of the content delivery online that the students can kind of grapple with and take in at their own time and space. Next slide, please. And then this final example I wanted to give is we were successful in the pivot because we also have students who are able to rise to the opportunity and take kind of exercise their own agency and responsibility and drive their own learning. So this has been an opportunity for us to rethink our research mentorship, advising, and the ID 2050 experience. And these students that you see here, I'm going to selfishly brag a little bit about my early research experience students over the summer, who I've had the pleasure of being able to continue to work with in the fall. So long before the pandemic, the ERIE program is already under the strong leadership of Professor Weeks. And the pivot online just helped us to work more seamlessly and comfortably throughout the summer. So the remote team setup helped with some of the blurring of lines of power and kind of getting us all comfortable with one another. We really could check in with one another and then get to the work in ways that were a little bit more natural and authentic than may have been if we were in face-to-face on campus even. They got to know me as a person. They got to see my cat walk in and interrupt discussions. And so over time, they took charge of interviewing and dictating agendas, opening up new questions and intellectual pathways. And then their work ended up going towards a number of grant proposals, articles, and a conference proposal. So I'm really proud of the way that they kind of worked through challenging circumstances to not only make the most of it, but to also really kind of learn what working in a distributed team looks like. And that can be just as successful as face-to-face. So my final slide, please. So just some big takeaways, I think, from A-Term for me. Prioritizing what makes the experience unique and meaningful needs to be the thing that drives the work that we're doing. So not losing sight of the learning objectives, making sure that the pedagogy kind of guides where we're going. We have a wonderful community here that would share both their really big successes and their beautiful failures comfortably and with humility. And that type of environment makes all the difference. And ultimately, what makes WPI unique has helped us to adapt to all of these uncertainties of the time, whether it's our willingness to innovate, our willingness to share and to collaborate with one another, or just the insights that we're willing to put out there without nervousness or without fear of judgment. I think our community really makes the difference.